Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Building a Smarter Supply Chain. It's a virtual edition of the BISG annual meeting. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and I want to welcome you today to today's talk. First, I'd like to also thank Bowker, which is a sponsor of the annual meeting series that we've converted from an in-person meeting initially in April and then later scheduled for September. We've gone to a virtual format so that we can bring you this content in light of the pandemic. Bowker's been a strong supporter of the Book Industry Study Group for many years and has been a regular supporter of the annual meeting. We really appreciate that their willingness to continue to work with us to bring you a total of 7 different sessions that will make up our annual meeting this year. Today, we're fortunate to be kicking off this series. The theme of the meeting itself is building a smarter supply chain, and we wanted to kick it off with a conversation with Craig Riggs of ReaderBound. Craig and I have been colleagues and have crossed paths on various conference speaking opportunities for probably the better part of a decade. But in his role as leading ReaderBound, he's doing a lot of really interesting work, and I'd like to ask him just to kick us off by telling us a bit about the work you are doing, particularly with ReaderBound.
Well, thanks, Brian, and hi everybody, and thanks very much for inviting me in to the session this afternoon. As Brian says, I'm one of the founders of ReaderBound, which is a company that's very much focused on the publishing space and in particular on building customized websites that are purpose-built for book publishers. The work we're doing with ReaderBound is informed by our experience. All our team comes from the publishing industry. We've all worked in and around publishing houses for the last 20 years. The last decade in particular, most of our work has been focused on building web platforms that are very focused on books. We're gonna talk about some of those today, including a large platform that we built here in Canada called 49th Shelf, which is very much focused on showcasing Canadian books. And so our work has been concerned now for the last 10 years plus with really that shift in consumer behavior and purchase behavior to the online channels, and learning more about how readers are interacting with books and authors and publishers online. And we've tried to apply all those lessons from our current and ongoing research into projects like 49th Shelf and ReaderBound, as we'll be looking at today. So thanks again for joining us.
And I'm going to be occasionally prompting Craig, although he has no shortage of stories to tell. But it's I work with BISG, as you probably know. We're the organization whose mission is to make the book industry supply chain more efficient and effective. We try to solve problems that affect 2 or more parts of publishing. So publishers talking to retailers or manufacturers talking to distributors. We have 4 core objectives. They include serving as an information hub for the book business, promoting standards and best practices that help us work more efficiently and effectively, conducting research on topics that are either emerging or pain points that are problematic within the book business, and building community of like-minded but differentiated problem solvers throughout the book industry supply chain. We have 5 things that we want to try and cover today. I want to spend just a couple of minutes on how we came to focus on building a smarter supply chain, both as a part of the conversation we want to have today with Craig, but also as a theme for the overall meeting. And then Craig is going to take some time to explain what the work that was done to create this metadata-driven presence for Canadian books, 49th Shelf, what lessons were learned, what is involved in creating tool sets for 21st century book publishing, and then steps that, based on his experience, that we can take toward creating a smarter supply chain. So I wanted to start with just a high-level diagram of the supply chain overall, not so much to walk through it, but to make a point that there are workflows that are set up to manage both physical and digital goods across the supply chain. There are at least 5 core segments within it, and the relative prevalence or dominance of different parts of them varies by the type of publishing that we do. But there are also simultaneously metadata and transactional workflows that need to be more tightly aligned in general with the work that's already going on with respect to how physical and digital products move. But it's also axiomatic that work has become more complicated, whether it's pricing models or the number of different titles that are produced each year, or the number of titles that are produced and then delivered as components or subsets of a full work. So that probably is not going to become simpler over time. And our role in part is to get us to a point where we are ready to, our supply chain is ready to support this complexity. We have at least 5 different things that we think are components of building a smarter supply chain. The first is, and you'll hear quite a bit about this, is the opportunity to capitalize on investments in metadata. Publishers put a tremendous amount of work into making high quality metadata, but the benefits accrue largely to other parts of the supply chain. And we think that there's a way to make that work better. We want to reduce the amount of manual intervention. There's a tremendous amount of hand-holding that occurs throughout the supply chain. As we scale in both volume and complexity, we think that that's hard to sustain. We'd like to see more two-way communication, ideally machine to machine, whether it's acknowledgement messaging for sending a metadata feed or something more sophisticated. And we would like to see, as we grow the amount of machine to machine communication, growth in the opportunity to apply business intelligence or even AI to help interpret the data and shorten the number of things that people need to get directly involved in. And then overall, we want to try and solve both current and emerging business problems. There are a number of things that we're doing within committee that are captured both in our charters and our work plans for those committees that show kind of what we're doing on the current side. But we'll be working this fall to identify kind of the longer term problems that we think BISG has an opportunity to solve, particularly for the US market. One of the things that and we can actually go to the slide that follows this to talk a little bit about the game plan for the annual meeting. So this virtual annual meeting had several different components, all of which were kind of built around the idea of building a smarter supply chain. So today's session, we're going to be talking about metadata-driven approaches to marketing and selling books. Tomorrow, and we have 2 other sessions this week. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about change management in the age of COVID-19 and what HR's role is. Next week, we'll actually build very much on this conversation. Noah Genner will lead a conversation with Noah Genner of BookNet Canada. We'll lead a conversation with Karina Urquhart of BIC, Book Industry Communication in the UK, and Graham Bell of Editor on real-time reporting and bigger data. Before that, we'll have lessons drawn from publishing entrepreneurs. That's on Thursday evening at 6 o'clock, kind of a more of a social hour conversation led by an author that we've had in distribution for our books overall. The last of the 5 sessions in this month will be sustainable publishing, where we need to go, moderated by David Hetherington. We'll follow that up in September with both an industry award celebration now, where we'll recognize several people who were already identified to as honorees for 2020, and a keynote conversation with Barnes & Noble CEO James Daunt that's scheduled for 2 p.m. on September 11th. So there's quite a bit of conversation both about the ways that we can improve the supply chain and real world ways in which we're currently struggling to do so. But before we go into the things that will go forward from here, I'd like to start by asking Craig to tell us a little bit more about 49th Shelf, how he came to get involved and what he learned from it.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's you know, as especially in your opening remarks today, I'm just thinking about our experience, obviously, around 49th Shelf and some of our other work in building web platforms, and really, what becomes clear as we look back over the history of these projects, and I mean 49 Shelf is kind of an interesting case study in itself because it has a long history. We've been working on this project now for nearly 12 years. And what's happened over that time is that we have certainly, I don't know if we've made a smarter supply chain or contributed to a smarter supply chain, but we've certainly influenced the development of the supply chain. And I think we've learned a lot about how it operates and how publishers and other stakeholders in the industry can adapt themselves to some of the really important changes in the marketplace that are evident to all of us. So 49 Shelf, I mean, let's think of it as a little bit of a case study for our purposes today, and kind of a concrete illustration of how metadata can be used to really effectively market books in the marketplace in which we find ourselves today. We didn't start with such large ambitions as Brian has sketched, and really important ambitions in terms of the further development of the book supply chain. But really we started, as I say, more than 10 years ago, really sitting around as a group of publishers and looking at some significant changes that we could observe. You know, what was clear to us at that time is that not only was consumer attention and buying behavior increasingly shifting online, but also we were all facing basically shrinking review coverage, a shrinking news hole for books and books coverage in mainstream media. We were also seeing an erosion of the independent bookstore channel. Both of those, for independent publishers in Canada, as I'm sure is the case in the US, those have been some of the most important channels historically through which those publishers have connected with readers. And so the erosion in both of those, both that media and that independent bookstore channel, was really a great concern to the publishing community at the time. The other thing that could be said is that this is again a historical feature of the Canadian book marketplace, that the domestic market here in Canada is very much dominated by imported titles, and this is an approximation of that market share for imported titles, which in the English language market in Canada primarily come from the US and from the UK, and in the French language market, of course, they come from France. But within the book market writ large in Canada, Canadian books have a relatively small share of that market, less than 20% certainly, and really it's going to be a little shade less than 15% by our best estimates. And so there is an issue in terms of just the visibility of Canadian authored books in our domestic marketplace. And at the time that we were really starting to grapple with these challenges, as I say, 10, 12 years ago, there was really no way to differentiate Canadian books. If you were a bookseller or a librarian or a book reader that had a particular interest in Canadian work, you had to just rely on good luck in your own efforts to find your way to those books. So our operating premise here was that if we could gather them all together, if we could create some critical mass of Canadian books, make it easier for people to find and explore the work that's available, then we would see greater reader interest, we would see greater purchase behavior, and really that was the idea and the goal that we started with. And so the answer that we came up with in sort of grappling with some of those challenges was 49 Shelf. And we thought, with all the activity, all the momentum towards online channels, really, if we created a web platform that showcased a large collection of Canadian books, we could start to solve some problems for the reader. It was quite apparent from consumer research at the time that there was not an issue in terms of demand. Both general readers, librarians, educators were all very quick to say they were interested in Canadian books and wanted to know more about them, wanted to be able to find them more easily. But we couldn't, in the marketplace, there was no easy way for us to serve that interest. The reader, in order to select and buy a book, they first need to know that it exists. They need to be able to find it easily. They need to then be able to buy it easily. And so our goal was to remove as much of that friction in discovery and purchase from that process as possible for both book readers and for people in the trade, booksellers and librarians or other institutional buyers. And so the answer that we came up with is a website called 49 Shelf. And the goal was to create a consumer-facing website that could be a showcase for Canadian books, and that would allow us to boost the visibility of those books, simply to make it easier for readers to find them. We don't sell books directly off the site, but we do link to booksellers of all sorts from every title listing, and we create those links as directly as possible to the corresponding product pages, so that, again, we're removing as much friction from that process as possible. And it's very easy for readers to follow their interest in a particular book or author through to a place of their choice where they can buy that book. So the other thing to be said about this is that in order for us to create a platform on this scale that was meant to be a representation of a critical mass of Canadian work, we had to find a very efficient way to get the bibliographic data, to get the product information for those books into place, not only to import it initially, but to be able to maintain it efficiently over time. And the answer to that was the ONIX standard and the bibliographic metadata that all publishers were already investing in and beginning to supply to the supply chain at that time. So thus began our education in the ONIX standard, and in fact our evangelization of the ONIX standard within the Canadian industry. Our group has always worked very closely with BookNet Canada, which is, as Brian mentioned, is a very important group in the industry here in Canada, and is a counterpart to BISG. They are in effect the Canadian supply chain agency for the book industry, and working closely together with our colleagues at BookNet, really for a period of years, we worked across the industry in advocating for better quality and depth in the metadata that publishers were supplying, and in fact working, publisher by publisher with the team at each press, really sort of to provide them with some coaching and support and to help them to strengthen the data that they were supplying into the supply chain. That was a interest that we had, obviously, for purposes of 49 Shelf. We wanted to be able to have the best available information about every book that was listed on the site. But it became a larger goal within the supply chain. It was a kind of one of our many accidental discoveries around this project, is that the 49 Shelf quickly became a kind of concrete illustration of what that data looked like to the consumer, that every publishing house was sending out. Publishers now were not just looking at raw data records. They could look at a consumer-facing website that showed them exactly what, because we didn't modify what they were sending at all. It showed them exactly what the data was that they were sending out and where it needed to be improved or corrected. And so it was a very useful sort of catalyst for improving the quality of metadata that publishers were supplying, which obviously was of interest to us at 49 Shelf, but it had a very nice knock-on effect in terms of building that capacity within the industry and improving the quality of data that all the publishers were supplying throughout the supply chain.
So as you go to the next slide, I just want to, there's a request for clarification. So you weren't actually getting metadata feeds from each publisher. You were working with publishers to make their metadata feeds better, but you were getting all your metadata from BiblioShare, BookNet Canada's shared catalog.
Yeah, this is, you would have to characterize BiblioShare as a really important enabling technology for a project like 49 Shelf. It was it's a national database that is maintained by BookNet. It gathers feeds from publishers and distributors across the country, and it gives projects like ours or any other recipients that same data is passed on to retail accounts and to other recipients, large and small. It gives us a single repository that we can reach into and pull out all of that aggregated ONIX data, and that's the data source that we use to feed the title listings on 49 Shelf. Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's an important clarification. So we were sort of working at each end of that channel. Our team was working with individual publishers across the country, as I say, and also with BookNet, and working closely with them to to basically shape the guidance around ONIX, the ONIX standard that we were all providing to the industry at that time, and just to help publishers get their data into the system properly, and so that we could show their books to the best possible effect on a site like 49 Shelf. What you see on the slide now is just really a kind of high-level overview of the history of the project. And when we first spun up 49 Shelf, it would have been we built the platform out over 2009 and 2010, and it was first released in 2010 as essentially as a closed beta that was made available just to publishing houses in the country so that they could see exactly the data that they were sending through to us. When we first spun up the site, we could only identify in the entire supply chain, based on the ONIX data available at that time, we could only identify about 16,000 Canadian authored books. And as I'm sure most people on the call will know, there's a little attribute in the ONIX record that identifies the nationality of the author. And using that little nationality tag on the ONIX record, we were able to determine, which books were Canadian authored and which ones weren't. And so we were trying to import everything that we could identify that was written by a Canadian author. And as I say, in 2010, that was a pretty small number of books. It was about really 14,000, 16,000 books that we could identify in the entire supply chain. And so we then set out over the next several years through about the midpoint of the decade in that work that I've just described in terms of going around to industry events, but also working publishing house by publishing house to strengthen the data feed that was going into the system. And we accumulated over that time what certainly felt to us like more of a critical mass of books that could be listed on the site. And we, by 2015, 2016, we were able to identify and list as many as 100,000 Canadian authored books. And that number, incidentally, now is a little bit north of 130,000, and feels a little bit more like a critical mass of Canadian work that we can showcase on the site. It's all derived from the ONIX feed that we're taking from BiblioShare. It's all derived from the investment that individual publishing houses have made in establishing that ONIX data and strengthening it over time. And the other important discovery that we made in the process of that work is that simply gathering all that book information together in one place and exposing it to readers is one thing. But we began to discover, and this happened again around the middle part of the decade as we sort of shifted our focus on the platform, we began to discover that getting to a critical mass of good data like that then opens the door to all kinds of additional things that we could do around the site. And really the last several years, our focus has been much less on building up the quality of data that's coming into the site, because it's so much better now than it was when we started. We have to spend much less energy on it now than we did, at the close of the last decade. And really our emphasis these last several years has been much more on reader service, on doing interesting things with that data, providing a lot of very active reader recommendations, themed reading lists. So we have a very active editorial program around the platform, that a dedicated editorial team, in fact, that they use that underlying metadata and title listings as a jumping off point to create a lot of really interesting original editorial and services for readers that have really driven the engagement and the audience around the site to a very, very different level. And so it allows us to, if you visit the site today, you'll see evidence of that very active editorial program. Going forward, we intend to push that a lot further in terms of our how we showcase award winners, how we present themed reading lists and other services for readers. It's become very clear to us that one of the things that readers appreciate most on a site like this is some of the same types of services that you would associate with a really good bookstore, almost hand selling, reader recommendations, thoughtful, curated, human intervention that helps readers find their way to the book that's right for them, or that matches their interests or their tastes. And that's been a really fun adventure these last several years, is learning more about what readers need when they travel in those online spaces, and to try and we some time ago set ourselves the task to try and, again, we don't sell books directly on the site, but we wanted as much as we could from the interface to the way that we interact with readers to the services that we provide. We wanted to approach as much as we could that experience that a reader would have if they walk into just a really good bookstore, you know, where things are carefully selected and where they can trust the recommendations that are going to be presented to them. And it's been a really rewarding part of our experience in building out this platform. It's been a tremendous platform for learning so much about reader behavior in the online space and how we can connect with readers really effectively. And so, you know, when you again, not selling books, but if you visit a title listing on 49 Shelf, and this is we're now looking at a screen capture of one of those listings. This is you'll notice that there are you know, buy buttons prominently available for whatever print or digital editions of that work is available. If you're to click on one of those buttons, it would take you directly to the corresponding product listing on whatever retail site that is. And again, we're trying to remove as much friction from the process for the reader as possible when they get to a point where they want to select one of those books. And the other thing that's worth noting about 49 Shelf, I think, is that with all the lessons that we've learned in building out this platform, with all the capacity that the industry has built in terms of strengthening the quality of metadata that each publishing house is supplying, and with all the engineering that we've built into the platform otherwise, it's now much easier for us to build, you know, to spin out additional sites or related sites that focus on particular types of work or even particular audiences. This is a bit of a jumble on the screen right now, but what it's showing us is screen captures from several related sites that we now support off of the 49 Shelf platform. Some of these do have direct-to-consumer sales. Some of them are focused on work from a particular part of the country. Some of them are focused on literary events. Some are focused on targeting merchandising books essentially for the library system and institutional buyers, and making, you know, presenting them in a way that's meaningful to those audiences. And each of these several additional sites that are now supported around the 49 Shelf platform, if we were just starting from scratch in every case, it would have been a huge undertaking. But some of them were literally built in minutes, you know, maybe 45 minutes, but certainly, like, you know, just a very superficial effort to create an interesting new showcase and a presentation of books for a particular reading audience and buying audience. And it's been a really exciting evolution of the project, in fact, to get to a point where we realize now that we can do that with relative ease because of the collective investment that the industry has made in creating some of these tools and creating that underlying capability in terms of just having really good metadata available. Once you get to that point where you've got rich detail about the books that you're presenting, you can uncork a lot of opportunities in terms of leveraging that investment to reach new audiences and additional audiences. And so that's been a really exciting discovery for us, I have to say.
And it seems to me that one of the things that you've also found is that spinning out the ability to create, for example, we have diverse books, depends upon both reliable metadata, reliably acquired. So the API that you're using to drive 49 Shelf is the same API that you could use to drive these other sites.
Absolutely, yeah. We really, what we've done is we've leveraged the engineering in 49 Shelf in terms of that API. We've built a very complex but interesting import process that pulls that ONIX feed into the platform and unpacks it in some very cool ways, and in ways that are meaningful. Not just, you know, we find them interesting as data nerds that think about this type of thing to an embarrassing degree, but more importantly, it's meaningful to the readers that are coming to the site. You know, it allows us to make really meaningful connections between books, you know, that organized by subject category or by theme, or of course by author or by series or what have you. And all of that connective tissue between books and authors is maintained actively and automatically within all of these sites. And again, it derives from the ONIX feed. So the import engine that we have will pull that feed in initially when we spin a site up and load all of that title information in initially. But we go back to the ONIX repository, whether it's BiblioShare or the publishers, if it's a publisher website, their ONIX database, whatever it may be, we go back to it. Typically, we go back to it daily and get new or updated records, and we pull those in. Especially, even a publisher catalog of 1,000 books, as every publisher on this call will know very well. The number of updates that happen across that catalog is quite significant. And so being able to have a website that is closely synced to the ONIX repository, and that automatically, to Brian's earlier point about building this, one of the elements of building a smarter supply chain is to have good electronic handshakes between systems, so that these things happen automatically and that we don't all have to sweat over them every day like we used to spend so much time doing. And now for all the sites that we support, this is a process that happens automatically, it happens quietly, it happens reliably on a daily basis, so that the content on the website is very, very closely synced to the content that's in the ONIX repository. Nobody has to put their hands on it. If something goes wrong in that handshake process, we have monitoring services in place that tell us something went wrong. Please go fix that or do something about it. But otherwise, everything just happens. It's like breathing. You don't think about it. It just happens, and it's a beautiful thing. And it allows it allows us to always be confident that the presentation that we have for an individual title on any one of these sites is the best available presentation that's available, and it relies on the authoritative detail that's being supplied by the book's publisher. And that's a really nice place to get to. It was a several-year journey, but once we got to that point where we knew we had not only a critical mass of metadata coming into the platform, but the quality and the depth of that information was really good. It was going well beyond the type of baseline metadata that used to be exchanged in the supply chain 10 plus years ago. Title, subtitle, author, price, distributor, that basic supply detail. Now, for a critical mass of books, we have really rich descriptive content, extended descriptions, sample and excerpt content, review excerpts, awards information, increasingly just some really smart detail in there, age and grade and curriculum linkages and leveling detail for children's and young adult titles. We're learning every year about some of the important nuance that's there and how those ONIX records can be further strengthened in ways that are meaningful for readers, that really, again, boost that discovery and visibility of books, but really just make it easier for readers to find the books that are right for them. And it's as I say, it was a long journey, but it's an exciting place to get to when you realize that opens the door to a lot of opportunities for marketing and sales activity in these online channels. So I think I've kind of skipped ahead to this slide in terms of saying a little bit about where we ended up, but I think you could also guess that there's kind of a virtuous cycle here, in the sense that us encouraging publishers to extend that investment in metadata is one thing, but very quickly, when any publishing house can see that has a direct impact on how their books are being represented in the supply chain on 49 Shelf and otherwise, they can see all of the research and then the experience of every publishing house bears this out. The better information you supply about the books, there's a very direct relationship between the quality and the depth of that data and sales. And especially given our current marketplace, where such a significant percentage of sales are made through online channels, that is very quickly that becomes the consumer-facing presentation of your catalog as well. And so there's kind of a virtuous cycle there, that on the one hand, you invest in improving the data that you're sending out about your books. You see those results. It encourages further improvement and investment in strengthening the ONIX record again. And again, we see better sales performance as a result. And so it's very much a reinforcing behavior in that sense. There's a lot of lessons there. 49 Shelf, as I say, it came out of a conversation within the industry in terms of how we were going to respond to some of the really significant changes that we were observing in the marketplace towards the end of the 2000s. And there's those same changes are afoot in both the Canadian and the US marketplaces, obviously. But really it's become, in a way that we didn't understand it would at all, a really important laboratory for the industry in learning how to do this work, and to being able to observe where the real impacts are to be had in terms of engaging readers and reaching readers, and by leveraging that investment in metadata to drive sales and marketing activity. And that's led us to an additional insight, which is that there's also an opportunity, and in fact, a need for every publishing house to have its own web platform. And for every press, that publisher website is the online home of their catalog, and a really important showcase for readers, for authors, for other stakeholders of what the publisher is doing, and the work that they're bringing forward, how they support their authors, and all the rest of it, all those important key characteristics of any publishing house. It's also an increasingly important direct sales channel, and a really critical opportunity to engage directly with readers. I mean, historically, as I said at the outset, I come from a background in publishing, and my experience when I was working in publishing houses, as I believe the experience of most publishers, is that we were not directly focused on the end reader in most of our sales and marketing activity. We were focused on intermediaries, we were focused on booksellers, we were focused on distributors, we were focused on getting media exposure for our books. This idea of engaging directly with readers, selling directly, and inviting them into the publishing process in different ways is a relatively new undertaking, right? We all do it to one extent or another now, but it's still something that we're kind of learning to do as an industry. And I think the publisher's website is a really invaluable, in the same way that 49 Shelf is a laboratory for a national industry. A publisher's website can be a laboratory for the publisher to learn more about their audiences, and to see what they respond to, and what works and what doesn't work over time. It's a very safe space to experiment and to try new things. And what the insight that we came to several years ago, partly arising from our work at 49 Shelf and on some of those affiliated sites, is that the tools by which this can be done are now so much more affordable and accessible to all of us. These are a publisher's website, especially one that is e-commerce enabled and that is integrated with other data services and other systems, is a reasonably complex thing, right? Anybody that's ever had to build one of these knows that it's a big task. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money, typically. And we just thought there's an opportunity here to put those tools more readily in reach for the industry, and to create purpose-built websites in a way that is much more affordable and requires much less investment of staff time. That was our goal with ReaderBound. We've created a platform for the industry that we use to produce feature-rich websites for publishing houses, but with all of those same goals in mind, in terms of boosting the visibility and discoverability of those books, making it really easy for readers to explore the publisher's catalog and to purchase if they choose to. So there's, we had some assumptions going into this that that, you know, now everybody has a really rich ONIX repository, that the rationale for those direct sales would be self-evident, and all the rest of it. And you know, the reality is that those things are not always true, that often there is you know, when we come to an individual publishing house, there's still a lot of work to be done on the metadata that's being supplied, or at least there's an opportunity to look at how it can be further improved to showcase the catalog on the publisher's own website in some special and unique ways. And we often work closely with publishers to look at how we can organize direct to consumer sales in a way that's really easy and efficient, you know, where those sales can be processed very smoothly in-house, or can be passed off to a distributor for fulfillment. And so typically these are websites that are integrated, as I say, with a variety of services, whether that's a distributor, or whether that's inventory systems within the publishing house, or whether that's you know, other services for transaction processing or what have you. It's these are sites that never stand alone, but that are often integrated with 3, 4, 5 additional important services in and around the publishing house. And that's been part of our learning experience, is just looking at how that integration can be efficiently done. And again, speaking to one of Brian's earlier points about building that smarter supply chain, is you know, you're always looking for ways to make the process more efficient, you know, so that if you have a website, that website can smoothly and reliably shake hands with other important systems within the publishing house that it needs to talk to. All of this work for us, as was the case with 49th, starts with ONIX and with leveraging the publisher's investment in that ONIX repository that they have built out, or that they're building out. And then syncing the website to the repository very closely, and looking, as I say, for opportunities to strengthen that ONIX feed for greater sales and marketing impact. And really, those opportunities begin and end with what is important to readers, or to any of the audiences that you're trying to reach as a publishing house. You know, if you're a children's publisher, that may be things like classroom resources, or some of the age and reading level data that I mentioned earlier, all of which can be readily accommodated within the ONIX standard. One of the great joys of this work, of working with publishers to build out websites in this way, is that every site that we build is a deep dive into the catalog of that publisher. And of course, everyone is distinct, and everyone is rich and interesting in its own way. And we never fail to learn something new about how new types of information can be introduced into the ONIX feed that really speak to the strengths of that publishing house, and speak to the interests of the readers that they're trying to reach. And so, you know, some examples of that are that, you know, of course, on your own website, you can style that ONIX feed a little bit to showcase the work in whatever way that you want. And the screen cap that we're looking on the screen now is just a slice from one of the ReaderBound websites, where the publisher has just a really remarkably diverse catalog, very strong tradition in LGBTQ publishing, but also cookbooks, also children's books, also really important literary work. And so how do you make a meaningful representation in a way that really works for readers of a catalog that's that diverse? Well, on your own website, you have a lot more options and a lot more flexibility, obviously, in how you accomplish that. And that's an opportunity that's available to every publishing house, obviously. This next screen cap shows an example from another client of ours that is they publish entirely drama. And one of the things that's really important to them is to be able to break down their catalog by cast structure. So, you know, this is a play for, you know, 2 female and 5 male leads, for example. And so we worked with them to present some, to develop basically a taxonomy to support that, and to get that information directly into their ONIX feeds, and then to feed it into the website. Now, if you go to this publisher's website, you can very quickly find whatever plays correspond to whatever cast structure your company or your theater group has. And that's just a really fun thing for them to be able to play with, and a fun way to present the catalog in a way that's really meaningful for that press, but also for the audiences that you're trying to reach. And again, this data comes out of the ONIX record. It's well supported within the ONIX standard. And by supplying it in their regular data feed as they do, every time they add a new title, these listings just automatically update. You know, they add a new title that has 2 female and 5 male characters in it. It falls right into that space reliably and automatically, and we never put our hands on it. It's just it just comes out of their regular ONIX feed. The other thing that we can do on a publisher's website like this is have a lot of control over how each individual title is presented. And so, you know, this is a sample listing from another client site, which is the University Press of Mississippi. They have a fantastic catalog, very deep in regional nonfiction for Mississippi and Louisiana, and I love their publishing program. But I also love that they are very adept at putting rich detail into the data record that they send for every book. And it allows us to do just some really cool things. Like you would find a lot of nice, rich detail on their title listings, some video content, some teaching resources that accompany the books, for example, excerpts and samples from the work. But just really nice extended descriptive content. The overall impact of this for a reader is quite significant. You know, you come to the listing, the buy buttons are prominent, so there's a clear action that you can take there. Or if you're a professor or institutional buyer or media reviewer, you can request straight away desk or exam or review copies. There's a lot of nice actions that you can take on every title listing, and a lot of supporting detail there to help inform the choices that you're going to make. And that's what we love to see on all of these sites, is that kind of rich detail for the reader, well structured and coherently organized, so that, you know, it's as a reader encountering that book in an online space, you can get just, you know, you can learn a lot about it. You can figure out very quickly whether it's the right book for you or not. And that's you know, we like to feel like we can accomplish that goal with every title listing on the site. And so, you know, you're underpinned by that, you know, really strong ONIX data. You've wrapped some nice tools around it that allow you to present the data effectively and allow readers to order those books or to take some other, you know, positive actions around your publishing program. And the reliable result of that is real sales results. Like we see this, you know, just as 49 Shelf is a lab for what happens when you expose that kind of metadata to consumers, what happens in terms of discovery and visibility and sales of those books. The ReaderBound sites that we build for individual presses are very much the same. And what we can see time after time quite reliably with these sites is that, you know, well-packaged bibliographic data like this, it's presented effectively for readers. And you give readers an easy way to act on that interest, to buy the books and or take any other related actions. It can be a really important driver of sales growth. All of our client presses report significant sales gains in terms of those direct consumer sales off their sites. And even, you know, here we sit on a video call in the midst of the pandemic, at a time when, you know, the bookstore channel has been heavily impacted. Stores across the US and Canada have been closed for an extended period, and we're all struggling with that reality. Our team has been really leaning into that challenge these last months and working, again, client by client with our ReaderBound presses to run some really creative and effective direct sales campaigns. And the results have been impressive. You know, clients are reporting gains, you know, many multiples of 100%, you know, 300, 400, 500% sales gains in terms of that direct sales channel over the period when it's been really hard to move books in some of the traditional sales channels. And that is itself an exciting discovery, and just only the latest lesson that we continue to learn together in developing and operating these sites. I think there is a tremendous opportunity there for any publishing house, and an opportunity in terms of sales, but also an opportunity in terms of engaging directly with readers and with other audiences that are important to your press, and most of all, an opportunity to just continue to learn a lot about how people respond to your catalog, and how you can present those books to best effect in the marketplace. And that's some of the most exciting insights that we have around these sites come in that in the shape of those types of observations about how readers respond to the publisher's catalog when it's presented online in this way. So that is, I imagine, Brian, I didn't ask earlier, but I imagine that that we can share the deck, or that we could share these examples with attendees. But I would just, rather than walk you through individual sites today, I just thought I would cite some examples of the sites that we're talking about today, so that you can see firsthand how they're structured, and just experience them. You can switch hats. You can experience them as veterans of the publishing industry, but also as readers as well. I mean, we all, I'm sure, do our fair share of shopping for books online, and I'll leave it to you to have that firsthand experience of the sites yourselves and see how they're structured.
We do send a follow-up email to both attendees and those who missed it, and we'll include that information in that. It'll go out tomorrow.
Fantastic, thanks, Brian. So I think I'll draw to a close at that point. In any case, I realize that our time is running short. I'd love to leave some time for questions here before we close. But just I think the thing to stress is that there is, I think, a tremendous opportunity for every press to leverage the investment that you're all making in the bibliographic data that you're sharing about your books, to really showcase them online on your own website and otherwise, and to treat that online space as a space for experiments, especially your own website as a space to where you can run, cheap experiments. Just try things, see what works, see what doesn't work, iterate on that, and improve over time. It's amazing to see what happens within the sales and marketing effort for a publishing house when they have the opportunity to test and test again and experiment in a space like that. And I think there's there are a lot of lessons there to be learned, but also a really clear and exciting opportunity for every press. So Brian, why don't I pause there and turn it over to you for questions, or for any comments that you want to add.
Thanks. We do have a few questions. I'll start with one actually that Judy Baker asks, is how do we get help with the universal adoption of ONIX? And I think the answer is in part that builds on that local feedback loop and seeing the results. Maybe if you draw up on the work that you did with 49 Shelf originally to evangelize, is showing results, gets people to do the work they need to do to adopt ONIX.
Absolutely. So yeah, and you know what, the great thing about the ONIX standard is that it is it's extremely well documented, and there are lots of great resources readily available to help you either begin to work with it, or to refine or extend your work with the standard. BISG, I mentioned earlier our close work with BookNet here in Canada, but I mean, BISG to me is a tremendously important mentor group in the industry in that respect, and it's just made a massive contribution to industry practice in the US and Canada over the years. We rely a lot on the resources that come out of BISG for our work, and you would find, I'm sure Brian could point you easily to some of the tremendous resources, the best practice guides that are available directly from BISG to guide your adoption and use of the standard. But there are many other excellent resources available, again, many of which are facilitated through BISG. But thinking about the editor group, BookNet here in Canada produces also really great resources for publishers that are equally relevant to publishers in Canada or outside of Canada. And I just think it's one of the nice things about where we are with the standard as an industry is that there's a lot of sharing of experience and expertise that's reflected in those readily available resources. And I'm sure that I mean, I'd be happy to point you to my favorite list of them. I'm sure Brian could do the same.
And Jeffrey Corrick, who's very active in our rights committee at BISG, asked the question, but is there any way to link to inventory systems at physical bookstores so readers can find out where to pick up a title locally, you know, if your inclination is to go to the local bookstore? And the answer might be not yet, but that's part of what we're trying to think through when we think about supply chain.
Yeah, you know, and there are some ways to do it. It's funny you ask because we're just working on that problem right now, and there are services available that allow you to query the inventories of independent bookstores, and to have some, you know, you couldn't query availability like within like Amazon DCs, for example, things like that. But I think we're starting to learn that there are some services available that allow us to have the kind of electronic handshake that I described earlier, but in this case with bookstores that allow us to have a little bit of insight into the inventory available. We're looking at that problem, and we're looking also at supporting a kind of open catalog search for library catalogs as well, so that depending on the use case, you could support you know, local searches for users that would allow them to query both bookstores in their area as well as libraries in their area. So these are, I can't say that we've completely solved those problems yet, but we're actively working on them. I think there's reason to think that it can be done.
I'm not sure that publishers would cotton to the idea of directing people to libraries as quickly as they might to bookstores, but
yeah, as I say, it depends on the use case. Yeah, it's not something we turn on for everybody.
I think that when it comes to digital inventory, Overdrive has been doing that for a little bit. It's in their interest as well, but it's a good example of the API that you can create based upon it's the information. If it's reliably structured and up to date, it can be. We can probably build the supply chain. But
well,
I think
I think it's a concrete example of one element of the smarter supply chain that you were talking about earlier, Brian. That it's you know, the extent to which we can integrate those systems. Like we're not going to build a system ourselves, for example, that somehow aggregates and queries the inventories of bookstores across the country. But the extent to which we could integrate with services that are available that do that, that's where it gets really interesting, you know. And increasingly there are those services and systems available that do talk to each other. And the more we learn to do that, the more we have the type of smarter supply chain you're thinking of.
Yeah, and you also have when this is not directly answering Jeffrey's question, but when you have a third-party fulfillment vendor, you can tie into their systems, and so that there's not manual intervention. So.
Yeah, most of our clients handle their direct consumer sales that way, and most of the time it's a pretty straightforward thing to accomplish. Essentially, what happens is at the end of the day, the website spins up a bundle of all the orders that came in during that day, packages them up into some agreed order format, and sends that off automatically to the distributor, who then fulfills the orders. The publisher never has to pick up a roll of packing tape or anything.
I think one thing that maybe to close on, because we have just a moment left, you and I started talking about 49 Shelf probably about the time that you started working on 49 Shelf.
Yeah.
But the notion of finding Canadian books is just simply one example of many different ways that you can solve a discovery problem with metadata and with with optimizing the site. Is that a fair way to close?
Oh, absolutely. It's only interesting because it's an example of how you can use metadata to support a marketing goal. And you could apply the same idea to any variety of use cases. You know, I mentioned Mississippi earlier, and they're a very strong focus on regional nonfiction. You know, they have an equally strong orientation to scholarly communities in the disciplines that they publish in, and to independent bookstores in their part of the country. And it would be very easy for them, because they've done a great job of building up the quality of the bibliographic data that they're sending out to their own website and otherwise. It would be very easy for them to package and repackage different parts of their catalog, you know, drawing on that underlying metadata capability. And it really, you're constrained only by your imagination in that respect. What we find is that you know, it is necessary to tune and adapt data for different audiences. We're doing a lot of work with kids and young adult titles these days, and in particular on merchandising those books in the school system. And the school system wants to think about and talk about books in a different way than the retail book trade does. And it requires us to tune that metadata and to present it in a little bit of a different way, but it's entirely possible to do so because of that underlying capability. Once you get there in terms of building up a really good ONIX repository for your publishing house and getting as much rich detail into those data records as you can, it really just opens the door to a tremendous range of opportunity.
Well, thank you today, and thank you, Craig, for being willing to kick us off in this series. We have, as I said at the outset, several different events coming up in the next 3 weeks, as well as into 5 weeks from now in September, conversation with James Don. I'd like to thank Bowker for its continued support and making it possible for us to bring this particular conversation to a broader audience without charge. Their support is critical to that, and we really appreciate not only their commitment to BISG, but to being a critical part of the industry overall. Craig, thank you today, really appreciate it, and I'm sure this conversation will continue long after you and I hang up.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Brian, and thanks everybody again for joining us today.
Take care. Bye-bye.